We asked the humans for shelter. They sent commanders, builders, and fighters. The alarms on my ship had not stopped screaming for 11 hours. I am Vexthal Orin, and I was a diplomat once, back when diplomacy still meant something. Back when my people, the Krine, had a home world to argue about instead of a fleet of broken ships fleeing through the dark. That world is gone now. The Shakur swarm took it from us in a single night, and every night since, they have been chasing what remains of us across the stars, like hounds chasing a wounded animal that refuses to fall. I stood on the bridge of the transport ship Meridian Hope, gripping the edge of a console that had not fully worked in 3 days, and I watched the tactical display flicker with red dots that multiplied faster than we could count them. Behind me, my people were crammed into cargo holds never meant to carry passengers, holds that reeked of fear and recycled air. Children who had never known a home other than a ship, elders who remembered what grass felt like under bare feet and would probably never feel it again. Our fuel reserves were failing. Our shields were a memory, and the swarm was closing in from 3 directions at once, herding us the way a predator herds prey toward a place with no escape.
Ambassador Orin, my aide, a thin, nervous cream named Talus, approached with a data slate trembling in his 4 hands.
We have exhausted every option, every ally, every treaty partner, every neutral system within range has refused to answer, or worse, have refused to even receive our signal. Every option except one, I said quietly. Talus went very still. He knew what I meant. Everyone on this ship knew what I meant, because everyone in this quadrant of the galaxy had heard the same stories, told in the same hushed, frightened tones. Stories about a species that had clawed its way into galactic awareness less than a century ago, and had done nothing since but make older, wiser civilizations uneasy. A species other governments described using words like unstable, unpredictable, and dangerous, the way you might describe a storm you did not want to be caught in. Humans. Ambassador, with respect, Talus said, his voice cracking. The reports on that species are troubling. The Vethmiri delegation called them recklessly aggressive. The Ophrenic Assembly refuses to even open formal channels with them. If we send a distress signal into human territory, we may simply be trading one nightmare for another. I looked past him, out through the viewport, at the dark where I knew the swarm was gathering. I thought about the sound the hull made when something struck it and did not break through, and how that sound was getting louder and more frequent by the hour. Talus, I said, we are already living a nightmare. I would rather gamble on an unknown one than guarantee the one we know. He did not argue further. There was nothing left to argue with. I sat down at the communications station myself, because I did not want to ask anyone else to be responsible for what I was about to do, and I began composing the message with hands that were not as steady as I wanted them to be. I kept it simple. I did not know human customs, did not know what tone would move them or offend them, so I decided honesty was the safest language of all. I am Ambassador Vexthal Orin of the Krine Remnant Fleet. My people are refugees. We are being pursued by a hostile force that has already destroyed our homeworld, and will destroy what remains of us within days, perhaps hours. We do not ask for weapons. We do not ask for territory. We ask only for shelter, for any place where our children might be safe long enough to grow up. If your people can offer this, we will be grateful beyond words. If you cannot, we understand, and we thank you for hearing us at all. I attached our coordinates, our numbers, everything we had. Then I sent it into the dark, toward the edge of human space, and I did not expect anything to come of it. I told myself I had done my duty as a leader, that I had exhausted the last option so that no one could say I had not tried everything. We watched the swarm's numbers grow on our sensors, watched our own fuel gauges shrink, and we waited for an ending that felt, for the first time since our exodus began, close enough to touch. It was Talus who woke me from the half-doze I had fallen into at my station, his 4 hands shaking my shoulder so hard I nearly fell from my chair. Ambassador, wake up. Something answered. I sat upright so fast my vision swam. The swarm? No. His voice had a strange note in it, something between disbelief and hope, an emotion I had not heard from any Krine in a very long time. The humans. I stared at him. How long has it been? 6 hours since we sent the message. He swallowed. Ambassador, that is not possible. No response should have reached us this quickly. The nearest human relay station is weeks away by any standard courier route. I moved to the console before he had even finished speaking, and there it was, sitting in our queue, a single message with a return address I did not recognize, and a signature that meant nothing to me yet, but would soon mean everything. I opened it. The Kryne Remnant Fleet's distress call has been received and verified. A response vessel has been dispatched. Estimated arrival, 18 hours. Please hold position and reduce all non-essential energy expenditure to preserve life support capacity. Do not attempt evasive maneuvers unless the hostile force initiates direct engagement. Assistance is coming. Signed, Captain Elena Marsh, United Earth Vessel Ember and Ash. I read it 3 times before I trusted myself to believe it was real. Then I read it a 4th time, because 18 hours felt like both an eternity and an impossibility, and I could not decide which frightened me more, the thought that help would not arrive in time, or the thought that it would, and that I had no idea what kind of help I had actually summoned. One ship, Talus said, staring at the message over my shoulder. They are sending one ship. Perhaps it is a scout, I said. Perhaps the main fleet follows behind it. Or perhaps, Talus said, and I could hear the fear creeping back into his voice. This is all they intend to send, and we have simply been given 18 more hours to prepare ourselves for the end. I did not have an answer for him. I only had a choice to make, and I had already made it the moment I pressed send on that first message. So I gave the order to hold position, to power down every system that was not keeping my people alive, and to wait. The next 18 hours were the longest of my life. The swarm did not know help was coming, of course. They simply continued what they always did, tightening their formation around us, the way a fist slowly closes around something small and helpless. Twice during that waiting period, scout vessels from the swarm broke from the main body and approached close enough that our sensors screamed warnings through the ship. Twice, I ordered every light on the Meridian Hope dimmed and every non-essential system shut down, and we sat in near darkness, listening to nothing but the recycled air moving through the vents and the frightened breathing of the people around me, praying that we looked like debris instead of prey. Both times the scouts moved on. Whether by luck or by some flaw in their sensors, I do not know. I only know that each time it happened, I felt Talus's hand find mine in the dark, and I let him hold it, because I needed the comfort as much as he did. Somewhere around the 14th hour, one of my engineers, a weary old Kryne named Bressa, approached me with news that our auxiliary reactor was failing faster than projected. We would lose full life support in 6 of the remaining 18 hours if nothing changed. Can it be repaired? I asked. Not with the parts we have, Bressa said. Not with the tools we have. We are not builders, Ambassador. We are diplomats and merchants and farmers. We fled our world with what we could carry, not with what we needed to survive in the dark for this long. I looked past her, toward the cargo hold doors, where I knew hundreds of my people were waiting in the dark, trusting that the choices I made would keep them alive a little longer. I thought about the 4 hours we would lose, the 4 hours that stood between arrival and disaster, and I felt something in my chest tighten that had nothing to do with fear of the swarm. Do what you can, I told her. Buy us every minute possible. She nodded and left, and I returned to my vigil at the communications console, watching the countdown to the human ship's arrival tick down, minute by agonizing minute, wondering if we would survive long enough to see whether the help we had been promised was real, or whether it would arrive only to find nothing left to save. At the 16th hour, our life support began to fail, exactly as Bressa had feared. The temperature in the cargo holds dropped. The air grew thin and stale. I moved through the ship myself, speaking to my people, telling them to conserve their strength, to wrap themselves in whatever warmth they could find, to trust that we had done everything we could and that help was close. I do not know how much they believed me. I do not know how much I believed myself. At the 17th hour, an elder named Corvain, a woman who had taught me diplomacy when I was young and idealistic, and certain that words alone could solve any conflict, took my hand in the dim emergency lighting of the cargo hold and asked me a question I will never forget. Ambassador, if the humans do not come, Or if they come too late, will you regret sending that message? I thought about the swarm closing in around us. I thought about the alternative, which was no message at all, no chance at all, only the certainty of an ending with no hope attached to it. No, I told her. I will regret many things if this does not work. But I will not regret trying. She smiled, a tired, sad smile, and squeezed my hand once before releasing it. At the 17th hour and 50 minutes, 10 minutes before the estimated arrival time given to us by Captain Elena Marsh, our sensors detected something entering the system at a velocity that made no sense to me. Bressa's voice crackled over the internal comm, tight with a mixture of alarm and disbelief. "Ambassador, you need to see this." I moved to the bridge as fast as my legs would carry me, my heart's pounding, uncertain whether I was about to witness salvation or something far worse. Tallis was already there, staring at the display with wide eyes, and when I looked at what he was looking at, I understood why. A single vessel had appeared on our sensors, moving through the system at a speed that should have torn it apart, and it was not slowing down as it approached us. It was accelerating, cutting a straight line directly toward the heart of the swarm formation surrounding our fleet, as if it intended to fly straight into the jaws of the very thing that had been hunting us for weeks. "That is the human ship," Tallis said, his voice barely a whisper. "Ambassador, that is Ember and Ash." I stared at the display, at the single point of light rushing toward an entire hostile fleet, with no hesitation, no caution, nothing that resembled the careful, measured approach any Krine commander would have taken. I had asked for shelter. I had asked for a place to hide. What was arriving instead looked nothing like shelter at all. It looked like the beginning of something the galaxy had warned us about, and for the first time since sending that message, I found myself wondering whether Tallis had been right to be afraid, whether we had, in our desperation, invited something into our lives that we did not yet understand and might never be able to control. The swarm's formation, which had moved with the slow, patient confidence of a predator certain of its meal, suddenly broke into chaos as their own sensors registered the incoming vessel. I watched red dots scatter and regroup, watched the entire hostile fleet reorient itself toward this single, impossible newcomer. And I realized, with a chill that had nothing to do with our failing life support, that we were about to witness something none of us had ever seen before. We were about to find out exactly what kind of help we had summoned into the dark. The single human vessel did not slow down as it entered the heart of the swarm formation, and for a moment, I believed I was about to watch our only hope for survival destroy itself in a single reckless act. My hearts pounded so hard, I could feel them in my throat. Tallis had gone pale beside me, his 4 hands pressed flat against the console, as if he could somehow steady the universe through sheer will. Then the ship did something that made no sense to me at all. It did not fire on the swarm vessels closest to it. It did not attempt to punch through their formation with brute force. Instead, it released a series of small objects, dozens of them, that scattered outward in a pattern too precise to be random, too fast to be anything but deliberate. I watched on our sensors as each of those objects unfolded into something new, something that had not existed a moment before, and I understood then that I was not looking at weapons at all. I was looking at decoys and shields, and something that looked remarkably like a wall being built in the middle of open space, faster than any construction I had ever witnessed. "Ambassador," Bressa said from the engineering station, her voice tight with disbelief. "They are creating a defensive perimeter." In real time, while under direct threat. I did not have words for what I was seeing. The swarm, confused by the sudden appearance of dozens of new contacts where there had been only one, scattered further, some vessels breaking formation entirely to investigate the decoys, others hesitating, uncertain of what they now faced. And in that moment of confusion, the single human ship slipped through the gap they had created, and came to rest directly between the swarm and the Meridian Hope. A channel opened on our communication system. Before I had even processed what had happened, a voice came through, calm, steady, utterly unbothered by the chaos surrounding her, as if she were discussing the weather rather than standing between a refugee fleet and an army that wanted to consume it. "Meridian Hope, this is Captain Elena Marsh of the Ember and Ash. I understand you've had a difficult few hours. Sit tight, we're going to make this easier for everyone. I found my voice, though it came out rougher than I intended. Captain Marsh, this is Ambassador Vexthal Orin. Your vessel is alone. The hostile force pursuing us, numbers in the hundreds. I do not understand how you intend to protect us. There was a pause, brief, and when she spoke again, there was something in her voice that I would come to recognize over the following days as distinctly human, a kind of confidence that did not come from arrogance, but from simply having done difficult things before and expecting to do them again. Ambassador, I appreciate your concern, but I need you to trust me on this. My crew and I have handled worse odds. Right now, the most important thing you can do is keep your people calm and follow any instructions my crew gives you. We are not alone, not really. We just don't need 100 ships to do what we came here to do. I did not understand what she meant, not then. I only understood that the swarm formation, which had been closing in with terrifying purpose only minutes before, was now hesitating, uncertain, confused by decoys and defensive structures that had appeared where none had existed before. And somehow, in the middle of that chaos, our failing ship remained untouched. Over the following hour, I watched something unfold that I still struggle to fully describe, even now, with the benefit of time and distance. The Ember and Ash was not simply a warship, though it was clearly capable of defending itself and us. It was something else entirely, a vessel built to do multiple things at once, and its crew, I would learn, was organized into 3 distinct groups that Captain Marsh referred to with a simplicity that belied how much they actually accomplished. Commanders, who coordinated everything happening around us with a calm efficiency that made our own crisis-driven chaos look amateurish by comparison. Builders, who I had already glimpsed in action, constructing defensive structures and decoys in the middle of open space, as though they were assembling furniture rather than fighting for survival. And fighters who I had not yet seen in action, but whose presence I could feel in the tension running through every message Captain Marsh sent. A controlled readiness that promised violence would come if it needed to, but preferred it did not have to. Ambassador Orin, came a new voice over the comm, this one belonging to a man who introduced himself as Commander Daniel Cole. I need you to transfer control of your fleet's navigation to our systems temporarily. We're going to guide you through a corridor we've cleared. It won't be comfortable, and it won't be pretty, but it will get your people somewhere safe. I hesitated. Every instinct I had spent my career developing told me that surrendering control of my ship to a species I did not understand, in the middle of a crisis, was exactly the kind of decision that led to disaster. But I looked at the sensor display, at the swarm formation still reeling from confusion, at the single human vessel holding a position no sane commander would have chosen to hold alone, and I understood that I had already made my choice when I sent that first message into the dark. "Transferring control now," I said, and gave the order. What followed was the strangest, most disorienting hour of my life. The Meridian Hope, along with the rest of our battered fleet, moved through a narrow corridor that the humans had somehow carved through the chaos of the battlefield, weaving between confused swarm vessels and the strange defensive structures the builders had created, structures that flickered and shifted in ways that made them nearly impossible for the swarm's sensors to track accurately. I watched my own ship's display show us threading a needle through hostile territory, with a precision I could not have achieved on my best day, guided by hands and minds I had never met. Throughout it all, Captain Marsh's voice remained a steady presence on our channel, calm and reassuring, occasionally offering small updates that meant nothing to me tactically, but meant everything to my frayed nerves. "You're doing great, Ambassador. Almost through the worst of it. Your people are handling this remarkably well, considering everything they've been through." I did not feel as though we were handling it well. I felt as though I was holding my breath for the entire duration of our passage, watching red dots swarm around the edges of our escape corridor, waiting for the moment when something would go wrong and the fragile order the humans had created would collapse into the chaos it was holding back. That moment never came. We emerged from the far side of the swarm formation into open space, our entire fleet intact, our people alive, and I felt something in my chest loosen that had been tight for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without effort. Behind us, the Ember and Ash disengaged from its position between us and the swarm, and I watched on our sensors as it retreated in the same direction we were heading, matching our pace as though escorting us rather than leading us. "Ambassador Orin, Captain Marsh said, and I could hear something in her voice now that had not been there before, a kind of warmth that suggested the crisis, for the moment, had passed. You and your people are clear of immediate danger. We're going to escort you to a temporary holding position while we arrange something more permanent. How is your life support holding up? I glanced at Bressa, who was staring at her console with an expression somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief. Failing, Captain, I admitted. We have perhaps 2 hours remaining before critical systems begin to shut down entirely. Understood. We're sending a support vessel to rendezvous with you within the hour. They'll get your systems stabilized. In the meantime, Ambassador, I'd like to speak with you directly, if you're willing. I think we have some things to discuss. I agreed, of course. What else could I have done? We had asked for shelter, and instead we had been given a demonstration of something I did not yet have a name for. Something that combined careful construction with sudden, decisive protection in a way that unsettled me, even as it saved my people's lives. As I waited for the promised support vessel, I found myself standing at the viewport, looking out at the strange, humming form of the Ember and Ash as it held position beside our fleet, and I thought about the warnings other species had given us about humanity. Reckless, unpredictable, dangerous. I had seen recklessness today, perhaps, in the way that single ship had flown directly into the heart of an enemy formation. But I had also seen something else, something that felt closer to controlled precision than chaos, something built on preparation rather than impulse. I did not yet know what to make of it. I only knew that for the first time in weeks, my people were alive and safe, and that the price of that safety, whatever it turned out to be, was a conversation I would need to have soon, with a captain whose calm voice had guided us through the worst hours of our lives without ever once raising an alarm. Talus approached me quietly as I stood at the viewport, his 4 hands folded in front of him, his expression a complicated mixture of relief and lingering unease. Ambassador, he said softly, we are alive because of them. Yes, I agreed. But we still do not know what they want in return. I looked at him, and then back out at the ship holding steady beside us in the dark, patient and quiet, now that the immediate danger had passed. No, I admitted, we do not. But I intend to find out. The support vessel Captain Marsh had promised arrived precisely on schedule, and what came aboard the Meridian Hope in the hours that followed would teach me more about humanity than every warning and rumor I had heard combined. The support vessel that docked with the Meridian Hope was smaller than the Ember and Ash, sleek and utilitarian, with none of the ceremonial trappings I would have expected from a diplomatic envoy. When its airlock cycled open and connected to ours, I half expected soldiers, or perhaps officials in formal dress, prepared to negotiate terms for the aid they had provided. Instead, a single woman stepped through, dressed in a simple gray uniform with tools strapped to her belt rather than weapons, and behind her came 3 others, carrying equipment cases that looked heavier than they should have been able to carry so easily. Ambassador Oren, the woman said, extending a hand in a gesture I recognized from old diplomatic archives, but had never actually experienced. I'm Grace Hollis, lead engineer aboard the Ember and Ash. Captain Marsh sent us ahead to get your life support stabilized, while she finishes coordinating with the rest of your fleet. Mind if we get to work? I stared at her outstretched hand for a moment, before remembering the gesture was meant to be reciprocated, and I clasped it awkwardly with one of my own. Her grip was firm, brief, businesslike. Please, I said, whatever you need. What she needed, it turned out, was almost nothing from us at all. Grace Hollis and her team moved through the Meridian Hope with a confidence that bordered on unsettling, diagnosing failures in systems they had never seen before, systems built on Krine engineering principles, utterly foreign to human design. I watched her run a small device along an access panel near our failing auxiliary reactor, watched her expression shift from concentration to something like satisfaction within minutes. Okay, she said, more to her team than to me. This is fixable. Not pretty, but fixable. Ryan, I need the portable fabricator. We're going to need custom coupling to bridge the power relay. Their connectors don't match anything in our standard kit. A younger man, introduced to me only briefly as Ryan Dale, produced a device from one of the equipment cases that unfolded into something resembling a compact workstation, and within minutes, it began producing a small mechanical component, layer by layer, with a precision that made our own manufacturing capabilities look primitive by comparison. "You can build replacement parts," I said, unable to keep the disbelief from my voice. "For technology you have never encountered before?" Grace glanced up at me, and there was something almost amused in her expression, though not unkind. "Ambassador, most of engineering is just figuring out how things want to work, and then giving them what they need to keep working. Your reactor isn't that different from 100 other systems I've patched together over the years. Different shape, same problem." I did not fully understand the technical explanation, but I understood the result. Within 3 hours, the failing systems throughout the Meridian Hope had been stabilized, not with sweeping, foreign replacements, but with careful modifications that worked alongside our own Krine engineering, rather than against it. The temperature in the cargo holds began to rise. The stale, thin air was replaced with something breathable and warm. I walked through my ship and watched my people, who had spent the last day and a half bracing for the worst, begin to relax for the first time in longer than I could remember. Elder Corvain found me near the cargo hold where the youngest children had been kept during the crisis, and she took my hand the way she had during our darkest hour, though this time her grip was steady rather than trembling. "They fixed it," she said, wonder in her voice. "In hours, Ambassador. Our own engineers said it would take weeks, if it could be done at all." "I know," I said, watching Grace Hollis move to the next section of the ship, already diagnosing new problems before anyone had even reported them. "What do they want, Vexthal?" Corvain asked, using my given name the way she had when I was young, a habit that always meant she was speaking as a friend, rather than as an elder addressing an ambassador. No one does this much for nothing. It was the same question Talus had asked, the same question that had been sitting in the back of my own mind since the ember and ash first appeared on our sensors. I did not have an answer for her yet, but I intended to get one. I found Captain Marsh several hours later, after the Meridian Hope systems had been fully stabilized, and our fleet had been guided to a quiet, uninhabited system, far from the swarm's last known position. She had transferred over to my ship personally, along with a small escort, and I met her in what had once served as our diplomatic reception chamber, back when we still had a home world and diplomacy still involved things like formal receptions. She was younger than I expected, though I had learned enough about humans in the last day to know that appearances could be deceiving when it came to judging their capability or experience. She wore the same simple uniform as her engineer, and she moved through the room with the same unhurried confidence I had heard in her voice over the comm channel. "Ambassador Orin," she said, extending her hand again, and this time, I met the gesture without hesitation. "I'm glad to see your people are doing better." "Captain Marsh," I said, "I owe you and your crew a debt I am not certain how to repay. But I would be a poor diplomat if I did not ask directly, what does humanity want from the Krine in exchange for what you have done?" She did not seem offended by the bluntness of my question. If anything, something in her expression suggested she had expected it. "Ambassador, may I sit?" she asked, and I gestured her toward one of the chairs still bolted to the floor from our chamber's original design. She settled into it with the same easy confidence she brought to everything else, and studied me for a moment before answering. "I'm going to be honest with you, because I think that's what you need right now, more than diplomatic language," she said. "Humanity doesn't have a single unified answer to give you, because we're not a hive mind, and we're not always in perfect agreement about anything, including why we do what we do. But I can tell you why I came, and why my crew came with me." "Please," I said. "We got your message," she said. "A refugee fleet, being pursued by a hostile force. No weapons requested. No territory requested. Just shelter. Just a place for your children to grow up safe. And Ambassador, I don't know how much you know about human history, but we spent a long time on our own world fighting each other over exactly that kind of desperation. Refugees turned away, people asking for shelter and being told there wasn't room, or it wasn't their problem, or the risk was too great." She paused, and something shifted in her expression, something that looked almost like old grief carried forward into a new context. "We decided a while back, as a species, that we didn't want to be the kind of people who ignore a message like yours. So when it comes in, we answer it. Not because we expect something in return, because we remember what it was like to need someone to answer, and have no one come." I sat with that for a long moment, turning it over in my mind, searching for the diplomatic angle, the hidden clause, the price that surely existed somewhere beneath the simplicity of her explanation. I had spent my entire career learning that nothing came without cost, that every act of generosity between civilizations carried an unspoken debt attached to it. "There is no cost," I said slowly, testing the words as much as the idea behind them. "There's always a cost, Ambassador," she said, and for the first time, something sharper entered her voice, something that reminded me of the confidence with which she had flown a single ship into the heart of an enemy formation. "But it's not a cost we're asking you to pay. It's a cost we already paid, a long time ago, learning the hard way what happens when people in trouble get ignored. We're not doing this to collect a debt from you. We're doing it because it's who we decided to be." I studied her carefully, searching her expression for the diplomatic mask I had encountered in every other negotiation of my career, the careful construction of sincerity, designed to disguise self-interest. I did not find it. What I found instead was something that unsettled me more than any hidden agenda could have, a simplicity of purpose that I had no experience navigating. "The other species we have encountered," I said carefully, "speak of humanity with caution. They call you unpredictable, dangerous." Something flickered across her face, not offense, but a kind of tired familiarity, as though she had heard this particular observation many times before and had grown weary of explaining herself to civilizations that judged her people from a distance. "We probably are dangerous, Ambassador, to the people who threaten those we've decided to protect," she said. "I won't pretend otherwise. You saw a small piece of what my crew can do today. But dangerous and cruel aren't the same thing, and unpredictable isn't the same as untrustworthy. We're complicated. We're capable of a lot of things, some of them frightening, most of them useful, depending entirely on what's needed in the moment." "And what is needed now?" I asked, "for my people?"
Right now, she said, standing. What's needed is rest, and a real plan, not just a temporary fix in open space.
"I'd like to bring you to a location where your fleet can actually be safe while we figure out longer-term arrangements. It won't be Earth, at least not right away. There are protocols for that kind of thing that take time. But there's a system nearby, uninhabited, resource-rich, currently under human protection. Your people could settle there while we sort out the rest." I felt something cautious stir in my chest, a hope I had not allowed myself to feel in weeks, tempered by the diplomatic instincts that told me hope this large was usually a precursor to disappointment. "And the Shakur swarm," I said. "They will not simply give up their pursuit because we have found new allies." Captain Marsh's expression shifted, something settling into place behind her eyes that I would later come to recognize as the particular calm she wore before violence became necessary. "No," she agreed. "They probably won't. But Ambassador, that's not really your problem to solve anymore. That's ours now, if it comes to it." I did not fully understand what she meant, not that day. I only understood that for the first time since fleeing our homeworld, I had been offered something that felt less like temporary survival and more like an actual future, however uncertain that future remained. I agreed to her proposal, transferred our fleet's course toward the system she described, and spent the following days watching my people slowly begin to breathe easier, to sleep without waking at every sound, to imagine, for the first time in far too long, what a life beyond mere survival might look like. I did not yet know that the true test of what humanity had offered us was still ahead, waiting in a system none of us had seen, where the builders would show us exactly what a foundation looked like when it was built by hands unafraid of hard, patient work. The system Captain Marsh led us to had no name that meant anything to us, only a designation of numbers and letters in human records, but to my people, exhausted and frightened after weeks of running, it looked like the most beautiful place in the galaxy. A pale yellow star warmed a cluster of planets, and the third of them, a rocky world with thin but breathable atmosphere and vast frozen oceans beneath its surface, became the place where the Crine would finally stop running. I stood on the observation deck of the Meridian Hope as our fleet settled into orbit, watching Talus beside me as he stared down at the planet with an expression I had not seen on his face since before the swarm took everything from us. "It is not our home," he said quietly. "No," I agreed. "But perhaps it can become one." What followed over the next several days was, in many ways, more astonishing to me than the battle that had saved us. The Ember and Ash was joined by 3 additional human vessels, each one larger and stranger than the last. Vessels whose entire purpose, I would learn, was construction rather than combat. Grace Hollis, the engineer who had saved our failing life support systems, oversaw the deployment of what she called ground teams, though the term barely captured the scale of what actually descended to the planet's surface. I insisted on accompanying the first landing party, over the mild objections of my own security detail, because I needed to see with my own eyes what these builders intended to create. Talus came with me, along with Bressa, who had grown quietly fascinated by human engineering after watching Grace work on our reactor. The shuttle that carried us down was piloted by a young man named Nathan Vance, who spent the descent cheerfully narrating everything he saw below us, as though we were tourists rather than refugees inspecting our potential new home. "You're going to want to see this," he said, as we broke through the cloud layer. "They started deployment about 6 hours ago. Should be well underway by now." I was not prepared for what I saw when we landed. Where I had expected perhaps a small outpost, a modest beginning from which we might slowly build something larger over months or years, I found instead the skeleton of an entire settlement already rising from the rocky ground, structures assembled with a speed that defied everything I understood about construction. Massive frames stretched upward, their foundations already anchored deep into the planet's crust, while smaller mobile units moved between them, placing components with mechanical precision. "How long has this taken?" I asked Nathan, unable to keep the astonishment from my voice. "Like I said, about 6 hours," he replied, grinning at my expression. "The builders don't mess around, Ambassador. Wait until you see the water reclamation facility. Grace is really proud of that one." Grace Hollis met us on the ground, her uniform now streaked with dust and grime, though her expression remained as calmly focused as it had been aboard our ship. She led us through the emerging settlement with the enthusiasm of someone showing off a project she genuinely cared about, rather than simply completing an assigned task. "We're using a modular foundation system," she explained, gesturing toward one of the massive frames rising nearby. "Prefabricated components, printed and assembled on site using local materials wherever possible. This planet has excellent mineral deposits, good soil composition beneath the surface ice, plenty of water once we get the reclamation systems fully online. Your people picked a good spot, honestly, even if you didn't pick it on purpose." "This will house all of my people?" I asked, still struggling to reconcile the scale of what I was seeing with the timeline in which it had been accomplished. "Eventually, yeah, and then some," Grace said. "We're planning for growth, not just your current numbers. Families expand, Ambassador. No point building something that's already too small the moment people start settling in." I walked through the emerging settlement in something close to a daze, watching Krine engineers, my own people, working alongside human builders, learning techniques and technologies that would have taken us generations to develop on our own. Bressa, usually so reserved, had abandoned formality entirely and was crouched beside one of the human engineers, asking rapid questions about power distribution systems, her earlier exhaustion replaced entirely by fascination. It was Talus who voiced the question that had been sitting quietly in my own mind throughout the tour. "Grace," he said, "why does this matter so much to you? You are not Krine. This is not your world, your people, your struggle. Why put this much effort into helping strangers?" Grace paused at his question, considering it seriously, rather than dismissing it, as I half expected. "I think," she said slowly, "it's because building something that helps people matters more than building something that just looks impressive. I've spent my career constructing things, Talus, defensive structures, ships, outposts, all kinds of things. But there's something different about building a home for people who didn't have one anymore. It feels like it means something, in a way that other projects don't always feel like they do." "Even for strangers," Talus pressed. "Especially for strangers," Grace said, smiling slightly. "Anyone can help the people they already know. It doesn't take much courage or much heart to be kind to your own. The real test is whether you're willing to extend that same care to someone you've never met before, someone from a completely different world, just because they needed help, and you were in a position to give it." I found myself thinking about her words for the rest of that day, as I watched the settlement continue to take shape around us, with a speed and thoroughness that felt less like charity and more like genuine investment in a future none of the builders would necessarily ever see for themselves. By the end of the first week, the foundation of what would become our new settlement stood largely complete. Housing structures, still bare and unfurnished, but sturdy and weatherproofed against the planet's harsh seasonal shifts. A central power facility, drawing energy from a combination of solar collection and geothermal systems buried deep beneath the surface. Water reclamation facilities processing the planet's abundant ice into clean, usable supply. Even the beginnings of agricultural domes, designed to allow cultivation of both native plant life and crops brought from our lost home world, carefully preserved in seed banks aboard our fleet. I stood with Captain Marsh at the edge of the settlement one evening, watching the sun set over structures that had not existed 2 weeks earlier, structures that represented the first real hope my people had felt since the swarm destroyed everything we knew. "This is more than shelter," I said quietly. "This is a beginning." "That was always the plan, Ambassador," she said. "Shelter that doesn't last isn't really shelter at all. It's just a delay before the next crisis. We wanted to give you something that could actually grow into a life, not just a pause before more running." "Your people ask for nothing in return," I said, still turning the concept over in my mind, still searching for the angle I had been trained my entire career to look for. "No resource agreements, no political allegiance, no military obligations. We'll talk about formal relationships eventually," Captain Marsh said. "Trade, diplomacy, all the normal things civilizations work out with each other over time. But that comes later, Ambassador, once your people are stable, once you're making choices from a position of security instead of desperation. It's hard to negotiate fairly with someone who's drowning. We'd rather help you find solid ground first." I looked out at the settlement, at crying children running between half-finished structures with an energy and freedom I had not seen in them since before the swarm attacked, and I felt something shift inside me, some old, cynical certainty about how the universe worked, beginning to crack under the weight of everything I had witnessed in the last 2 weeks. "There are those among my people," I admitted, "who still fear this generosity as a prelude to something else, a debt that will eventually come due, perhaps in a form we do not yet anticipate." Captain Marsh nodded slowly, not dismissing the concern, but considering it with the same seriousness Grace had shown Talus's question days earlier. "That fear is fair, Ambassador, given what you've probably heard about us from other species," she said. "I won't pretend humanity is simple, or that every human agrees on everything, or that we've never made mistakes dealing with people different from ourselves. But I will tell you this. What we're building here isn't a trap. It's exactly what it looks like. A place for your people to be safe, to grow, to eventually decide for yourselves what kind of relationship you want with humanity going forward, without that decision being made under threat or desperation." I believed her. I am not certain exactly when that belief solidified, whether it was watching Grace Hollis work tirelessly alongside my own engineers, or hearing Elder Corvain describe how the human medical teams had spent hours treating injuries our own doctors lacked the equipment to address, or simply watching my people sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks, inside structures that had not existed before humanity answered our call. But somewhere in that second week, the deep, cautious suspicion I had carried since sending that first desperate message began to soften into something that felt dangerously close to trust. I did not yet know that trust would be tested again, far sooner than any of us expected, and that the same humanity capable of building an entire settlement from nothing in the span of 2 weeks was equally capable of something far darker, something that would reveal exactly why the rest of the galaxy spoke of humans with such careful, fearful respect. The Shakur swarm had not forgotten about us, and they were coming. The warning came on the 17th day of our settlement, in the middle of a meal I was sharing with Elder Corvain and Talus, in what had become our temporary administrative building, a simple structure the builders had raised in the settlement's center. I remember the meal because it was the first proper meal any of us had eaten since arriving, food grown in the new agricultural domes rather than rationed from our depleted ship stores. And I remember thinking, in that quiet, ordinary moment, that perhaps we had finally begun to heal. Then Nathan Vance burst through the door without knocking, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced entirely by something tighter, more urgent. "Ambassador, Captain Marsh needs you at the command center immediately." Long-range sensors just picked up a large contact entering the system. My stomach dropped. I did not need to ask what kind of contact. I already knew. I followed him at a near run, Talus and Corvain close behind me, through the settlement that had begun to feel almost peaceful, past children who had been playing moments earlier, and were now being gathered indoors by watchful parents, who had heard the same warning ripple through our community. By the time I reached the command center, a hastily constructed building near the settlement's edge, the mood inside had shifted entirely from the calm efficiency I had grown accustomed to over the previous 2 weeks. Captain Marsh stood before a large tactical display, her expression sharp and focused in a way I had not seen since our first encounter in open space. Commander Daniel Cole stood beside her, along with several other officers I recognized from the Ember and Ashes crew, all of them studying the same display with grim concentration. "Ambassador," Captain Marsh said without turning from the display, "the Shakur swarm has entered this system. Their formation suggests they tracked your fleet's course before we finished obscuring your trail. Current estimate puts their lead elements at 8 hours from planetary orbit." 8 hours, I repeated, the number hitting me like a physical blow. 2 weeks of building, of hoping, of allowing myself to believe we had finally found safety, and now it was collapsing back into the same nightmare we had barely escaped. "How many ships?" Talus asked, his voice tight. "More than escorted your fleet before," Commander Cole said grimly. "Best estimate, somewhere between 300 and 400 vessels, though the swarm's exact numbers are difficult to pin down, given how their formation constantly shifts." I felt the room tilt slightly around me. 400 vessels, against the handful of human ships currently in the system, against a settlement barely 2 weeks old with no defensive infrastructure to speak of. "We cannot evacuate in 8 hours, I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "The settlement, the fleet. We do not have the capacity to move everyone in time." "We're not evacuating, Ambassador," Captain Marsh said, and something in her tone made me look at her directly for the first time since entering the room. "Captain, 400 ships." "I heard the number, Ambassador," she said, cutting me off, though not unkindly. "I need you to trust me the same way you trusted me 2 weeks ago, when I told you to hold position while a single ship flew toward an enemy formation. This settlement is not falling today. Your people are not running again today. I need you to help me keep your community calm, while my crew handles what comes next." I stared at her, searching for the same calm confidence I had witnessed before, and found it, though layered now with something harder, something that reminded me uncomfortably of the warnings other species had given about humanity's capacity for violence when pushed toward it. "What do you need from us?" I asked, forcing my voice steady. "Get your people into the settlement's lower structures," she said. "The builders reinforced the foundation levels specifically for scenarios like this one, hoping we'd never need them, but preparing anyway. It won't be comfortable, but it will be safe. Beyond that, Ambassador, I need you to let my crew do what we came here to do." I did not fully understand what that meant until the following hours revealed it to me in devastating detail. Over the next 6 hours, the calm, careful efficiency I had witnessed among the builders during construction transformed into something else entirely, a rapid, focused mobilization that felt less like panic and more like the execution of a plan that had existed long before the crisis arrived. Grace Hollis, whom I had last seen cheerfully showing off water reclamation systems, now moved through the settlement, directing the rapid deployment of defensive structures I had not even known existed, hidden components built into the settlement's foundation during its initial construction, designed and installed without ever needing to be used, prepared for exactly this possibility. "You built defenses into the settlement from the beginning," I said to her, as I watched massive structures unfold from what I had assumed were simple storage buildings, transforming into something that looked disturbingly like weapon emplacements. "Ambassador, we've dealt with hostile pursuit before," Grace said, not looking up from the console she was operating. "Building shelter without building the capacity to defend it is just building a bigger target. We hoped we wouldn't need this. We built it anyway." I moved through the settlement in those final hours before the swarm's arrival, watching my own people settle into the reinforced lower structures the builders had prepared, watching human medical teams establish emergency stations, watching the settlement I had believed to be a peaceful beginning reveal itself to also be something far more prepared for violence than I had ever suspected. It was in the settlement's lower levels, crowded with frightened, crying families, that I finally encountered the third group Captain Marsh had described to me weeks earlier, the group I had not yet seen in action, the fighters. They moved differently than the builders, differently than the calm command staff I had grown accustomed to aboard the Ember and Ash. There was a stillness to them, a focused quality, that reminded me of predators before a hunt, though none of them displayed anything resembling the aggressive posturing I might have expected. A woman named Sophie Lane, whom I had known only as one of the medical staff who had treated our injured during the initial rescue, moved through the shelter checking on frightened children, with the same gentle care she had shown weeks earlier, though now equipped with gear that told a very different story about her capabilities. "You are a healer," I said to her, confused by the transformation. "I'm a lot of things, Ambassador," she said, checking a young crying child's vitals with practiced efficiency. "Today, I'm making sure your people stay safe down here. Whatever happens topside, that's not going to change." I found Owen Price, a man I recognized as leading much of the fighter contingent, standing near the shelter's entrance, studying a tactical display with an intensity that made the surrounding chaos seem to fade around him. He glanced up as I approached, and something in his expression softened slightly, though the underlying tension never fully left. "Ambassador Oren," he said, "you should be below with your people." "I needed to understand," I said honestly, "what is coming, what you intend to do." He considered me for a moment, then gestured toward the display, showing the swarms approaching formation, still hours away but drawing closer with every passing minute.
What's coming, Ambassador, is exactly what's been hunting your people for weeks, he said.
A force that doesn't negotiate, doesn't retreat, doesn't stop until it either consumes what it's chasing or is destroyed trying. "We've studied the reports from your fleet's earlier engagements. We know what we're dealing with." "And your plan?" I asked. "Against 400 vessels?" "My plan," Owen said, "is the same plan it's always been when something threatens people we've decided to protect. We don't measure this fight by their numbers, Ambassador. We measure it by making sure it ends with your people still standing here tomorrow." I did not find comfort in his words, not entirely, because I could hear beneath the calm confidence something that unsettled me deeply, a willingness to face impossible odds without hesitation, a conviction so absolute it bordered on frightening. This was the humanity other species warned about, I realized. Not simple aggression, not mindless violence, but this exact quality, an unwavering resolve that treated overwhelming danger as merely a problem requiring the right solution, rather than a reason for retreat. "Owen," I said, "may I ask you something honestly?" "Of course." "Are you afraid?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he answered, his voice had lost some of its earlier hardness, revealing something more human beneath the professional composure. "Every time, Ambassador," he admitted. "Anyone who tells you they're not afraid facing something like this is either lying or doesn't understand what's actually at stake. I'm afraid. My crew is afraid. But we've learned that fear doesn't have to be the thing that decides what we do next. It's just something we carry with us while we do it anyway." I returned to the shelter's lower levels as the final hour before the swarm's arrival began, finding Talus and Corvain among the crowded, anxious families, and I settled beside them in the dim emergency lighting, listening to the distant hum of the settlement's defensive systems powering to full readiness above us. "Ambassador," Corvain said quietly, "whatever happens today, I want you to know that these last 2 weeks, however brief, however uncertain they may turn out to have been, were the first weeks in a long time that I remembered what it felt like to hope for something beyond mere survival. Whatever the humans are, whatever darker capabilities lie beneath their kindness, I do not regret trusting them enough to build something here." I took her hand, the same gesture we had shared during our darkest hour aboard the Meridian Hope, and held it as the settlement's alarms began to sound, signaling that the Shakur swarm had entered final approach toward the world we had only just begun to call home. The nightmare that had chased us across the stars had finally arrived, and for the first time, my people were not alone to face it. The sounds began before I saw anything at all, a distant, rolling thunder that traveled through the settlement's foundation and into the reinforced walls of our shelter, vibrations that made dust drift down from the ceiling and made every crine around me go still, with a fear I recognized from our worst days, fleeing across open space. Children who had spent the last 2 weeks slowly forgetting what terror felt like, now clung to their parents, and I found myself gripping Corvain's hand tightly enough that I worried I might hurt her, though she did not pull away. We could not see the battle unfolding above us, but the settlement's internal communication system had been left open, and through it, we caught fragments of the coordination happening between Captain Marsh and her crew. Calm, clipped exchanges that painted a picture of the violence occurring beyond our shelter's walls, even without visual confirmation. Perimeter holding at Grid 7, minimal breach attempts. Builders reporting structural integrity at 94%, defensive network fully operational. Fighter Squadron 3, engaging secondary formation, no casualties reported. I clung to those fragments, searching them for reassurance, though the sheer number of swarm vessels mentioned in passing, the constant references to formations and engagements happening simultaneously across multiple fronts, painted a picture of a battle far larger and more chaotic than anything I had witnessed during our initial rescue. Bressa, who had insisted on remaining near the shelter's communication terminal despite having no formal role in the defense, translated some of the tactical language for those of us less familiar with human military terminology, her voice steady despite the tremor I could see in her hands. "They are not simply defending the settlement," she said, studying the readouts scrolling past. "They are using the defensive structures the builders created, the ones disguised as ordinary buildings, as an integrated network. Look, here, this section of the perimeter just redirected an entire wave of swarm vessels into what appears to be a kill zone constructed specifically for this scenario. They prepared for this exact possibility," I said, remembering Grace Hollis's words from earlier that day. "Not hoping to need it, but building it regardless." "It is more than that, Ambassador," Bressa said, her scholarly fascination briefly overriding her fear. "This is not simply defense. This is an entire system designed to turn overwhelming numbers into a disadvantage for the attacker. The swarm's strength has always been their numbers, their willingness to sacrifice vessels without hesitation. But look at how the human defensive network channels that aggression into predictable patterns their weapon systems are clearly optimized to exploit." I did not have Bressa's technical understanding, but I understood the underlying truth well enough. What the Shakur swarm had always relied upon, overwhelming numbers thrown against opponents until sheer attrition secured victory, was being systematically dismantled by a defense built with exactly that strategy in mind. The builders had not simply constructed shelter. They had constructed a trap, patient and precise, waiting weeks for a threat they hoped would never come, prepared regardless. Hours passed in that dim shelter, marked by distant thunder and fragmented reports crackling through the communication system, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tenor of those reports began to shift. The tense urgency that had characterized the battle's opening hours gave way to something calmer, more controlled, exchanges between human officers that sounded less like desperate defense and more like methodical, grinding progress. Swarm formation alpha, reduced by 60%, remaining elements retreating towards secondary position. Builders, confirming 0 breaches across primary perimeter, structural integrity holding steady. Fighter Squadron, reporting swarm command vessel, located and engaged. That last report drew a sharp intake of breath from Bressa, and I looked at her, uncertain what significance it held. "Their command vessel," she explained. "If the humans have located and engaged the swarm's central coordination point, that could fundamentally change the battle's trajectory. The Shakur swarm, from everything we observed during our own encounters with them, relies heavily on centralized coordination. Disrupting that command structure could cause the remaining formation to lose cohesion entirely." I held my breath through the following 20 minutes, the longest stretch of silence on the communication channel since the battle began, my heart's pounding with an anxiety I had not felt since watching the single human vessel fly directly into the heart of an enemy formation weeks earlier. Around me, the shelter had gone nearly silent as well, every crine present sensing that something significant was unfolding above us, even without understanding the specific details. Then Captain Marsh's voice came through the channel, and something in her tone told me before her words even registered that the tide had finally turned decisively. All units, swarm command vessel destroyed. Repeat, swarm command vessel destroyed. Remaining hostile formation, showing signs of significant coordination failure. Fighter squadrons, press the advantage. Builders, maintain perimeter integrity in case of desperate counterattack. This is close, everyone! Let's finish it clean! The following hour brought a steady stream of increasingly positive reports. Swarm vessels retreating in disorganized clusters. Formations collapsing without central coordination. Human forces methodically securing the space around our settlement without suffering the catastrophic losses I had feared, given the overwhelming numbers we faced. By the time the all-clear signal finally sounded through the shelter's speakers, the sun had set entirely outside, and I emerged from the reinforced lower levels into a night sky I barely recognized, scattered with the drifting debris of a battle that had raged for hours above our heads. The settlement itself stood remarkably intact. The defensive structures the builders had disguised as ordinary buildings, now clearly visible in their true function, some still humming with residual energy from the engagement, others silent and spent. I found Captain Marsh near the settlement's command center, her uniform marked with the visible strain of the previous hours, though her expression carried something that looked almost like quiet satisfaction beneath the exhaustion. "Ambassador," she said, "your settlement held. Your people are safe." "At what cost?" I asked quietly, though I feared the answer. "We lost 2 fighter squadron members," she said, and something genuine and heavy passed across her face as she said it. Grief that felt entirely at odds with the calm, controlled violence I had witnessed reported through the communication channel over the previous hours.
Owen Price is among the injured, though he'll recover.
"We'll honor those we lost properly, in time. But Ambassador, your people, every single one of them, made it through tonight." I stood beside her, looking out at the wreckage scattered across the settlement's perimeter, remnants of the swarm formation that had chased my people across the stars for weeks, finally, decisively defeated. I thought about Owen's words from hours earlier, about fear not being the thing that decided what someone did next, and I understood now, in a way I had not fully grasped before, the true weight of what that philosophy actually cost the people who lived by it. "You spoke of humanity's capacity for darkness," I said slowly, remembering my earlier hesitations, the warnings other species had given us. I believed, perhaps, that I would witness something cruel today, something that justified the fear other civilizations hold toward your people. "And what did you witness instead, Ambassador?" Captain Marsh asked, though something in her tone suggested she already anticipated my answer. "I witnessed grief," I said, "alongside violence, yes, alongside a willingness to face overwhelming odds without hesitation. But beneath all of it, I witnessed people who cared deeply about the cost of what they were doing, even as they did it anyway, because the alternative, allowing my people to be destroyed, was a cost they found unacceptable." Captain Marsh was quiet for a long moment, studying the wreckage scattered across the settlement's edge, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight I had not heard from her before. "That's the part other species tend to miss, Ambassador, when they call us dangerous," she said. "They see the willingness to fight, and they stop looking any further. They don't see what it costs us, or why we're willing to pay that cost in the first place. We're not dangerous because we enjoy violence. We're dangerous because we've decided some things are worth protecting badly enough that we'll pay whatever price protecting them requires." I looked out at the settlement, at my people slowly emerging from the shelter behind us, blinking against the night sky, beginning to understand that the nightmare which had haunted them for weeks had finally, truly ended. Children ran toward parents who had fought through the terror of the day's events, and somewhere in the crowd, I saw Elder Corvain embracing a young human medic, tears streaming down both their faces, grief and relief tangled together in a way that transcended the difference between our species entirely. The Shakur swarm was gone. My people were safe, and humanity, the species that other civilizations had warned us to fear above all others, had proven itself capable of something far more complicated than simple danger, a willingness to build gently and fight fiercely, sometimes within the very same day, all in service of a promise made to strangers who had asked for nothing more than shelter. I did not yet know what the coming days would bring, what formal relationship might eventually form between the Krine remnant and the vast, complicated civilization that had saved us. But standing there in the aftermath of that battle, watching my people slowly begin to believe, truly believe, that their long flight from destruction had finally reached its end, I understood something that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. The galaxy feared humanity for good reason, but that same fear, I now understood, was inseparable from something far rarer among the stars, a species willing to answer a desperate call from strangers, and then pay whatever price was necessary to keep that answer true. 3 months passed before I finally understood the full shape of what had been built for us, not just the settlement itself, though it had grown considerably in that time, expanding beyond its original foundation into something that genuinely resembled a permanent home rather than a temporary shelter. What I came to understand more deeply was the shape of the relationship forming between my people and the humans who had answered our desperate call, a relationship that continued to defy every expectation I had carried into it. I stood once more on the settlement's central plaza, though it looked nothing like the bare, dusty ground I had first walked upon months earlier. Gardens had been cultivated using seeds preserved from our lost world, growing alongside plants native to this new one, a deliberate blending that Grace Hollis had insisted upon when the agricultural teams first proposed the settlement's long-term landscaping. "No reason it all has to look like it came from one place," she had told me at the time. "Your people brought pieces of home with you. Might as well let those pieces grow here too, alongside whatever this place already had to offer." Captain Marsh had remained in the system throughout those 3 months, though her role shifted gradually from crisis management towards something closer to diplomatic liaison, spending long hours with me discussing the eventual shape of formal relations between the Krine remnant and the broader human sphere of influence. It was during one of these conversations, held in the same administrative building where I had first learned of the swarm's return, that I finally asked her the question that had been sitting unspoken between us since our earliest encounter. "Captain," I said, "when this began, you spoke of humanity's history, of understanding what it felt like to ask for help and receive silence instead. I have wondered, in the months since, whether you would be willing to share more of that history with me." She considered the question for a long moment, and I saw something pass across her expression, old weight carried forward from a past I still understood only in fragments. "It's not a simple story, Ambassador," she said finally. "Humanity spent a long time divided against itself, fighting over resources, over borders, over differences that seem almost absurd in hindsight. Once we finally understood how much more we had in common than we had apart. There were terrible periods in our history where people fleeing danger were turned away by those who could have helped them, sometimes for reasons that felt practical at the time, sometimes simply because helping felt too costly, too risky, too inconvenient. And this history shaped your response to our message," I said. "It shaped a lot of things, Ambassador," she agreed. "Somewhere along the way, enough of us decided we didn't want to keep repeating that mistake, generation after generation. We decided that when someone asks for shelter, the answer should be yes, whenever we're capable of giving it. Not because it's easy, but because we finally understood what it cost, historically, to keep saying no." I thought about her words often in the weeks that followed, turning them over alongside everything else I had witnessed since sending that first desperate message into the dark. The builders who had constructed an entire settlement from nothing in a matter of weeks. The fighters who had defended that settlement against overwhelming odds, grieving their losses even as they achieved victory. The quiet, steady presence of Captain Marsh herself, who had guided us through every stage of this transition with a patience that never once demanded gratitude or obligation in return. It was during a formal gathering marking the settlement's official establishment, held 6 months after our original arrival, that representatives from several other galactic civilizations finally arrived, drawn by reports of what had transpired in this system, curious and cautious in equal measure about the nature of the alliance forming between the Krine and humanity. I stood beside Captain Marsh as delegates from the Vethmiri and the Ophrenic Assembly, the same civilizations whose warnings about humanity had once filled me with such caution, toured the settlement with expressions that shifted from skepticism to something closer to unease, as they witnessed the scale of what had been accomplished. A Vethmiri delegate, an older diplomat named Senis, whose caution I recognized as mirroring my own initial hesitation, approached me privately during the gathering's reception, his expression troubled. "Ambassador Oren," he said, "I confess, I did not expect to find what I have found here. We were told this species was reckless, that any alliance with them carried unacceptable risk. "And what have you found instead?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment, watching Grace Hollis laugh with a group of crying children who had gathered around her, showing her something they had built together in the settlement's newly established learning center. "I have found," he said slowly, "a species capable of terrible violence. Yes, exactly as we were warned. But also, a species that built all of this, unprompted, unpaid, for strangers who had nothing to offer them in return beyond gratitude. I do not know what to make of a species capable of holding both of those truths at once." "Neither did I admitted, "when this began. I am not certain I fully understand it even now. But I have learned this much, Ambassador Senis. The danger the galaxy fears in humanity is real. I witnessed it myself during the battle that saved my people. But that danger exists in service of something else, something the rest of the galaxy rarely stops to consider when passing judgment from a safe distance." "And what is that?" he asked. "A willingness to answer," I said. "To hear a desperate call from strangers and choose to respond, even knowing what that response might eventually cost. Most civilizations calculate that cost carefully before deciding whether help is worth extending. Humanity, I have come to understand, decides first that help is owed, and calculates the cost only after committing to pay it." Senis left the gathering that evening with much to consider, and word would eventually spread throughout the wider galaxy about what had transpired in our small, once nameless system, stories that would grow and shift with each retelling, some emphasizing the battle and the overwhelming defeat of the Shakur swarm, others emphasizing the speed and generosity of the settlement's construction, still others focusing on the quiet, complicated humanity of individuals like Captain Marsh and Grace Hollis and Owen Price, who had given so much of themselves to protect people they had never previously known existed. I think of Elder Corvain often, of the question she asked me during our darkest hour aboard the Meridian Hope, whether I would regret sending that first desperate message if help never came, or came too late. I did not regret it then, uncertain as I was of what awaited us in humanity's response. I certainly do not regret it now, having witnessed firsthand what that response actually contained. We asked the humans for shelter, uncertain what such a request might invite into our lives. What we received instead was commanders who guided us through impossible odds with unshakable calm, builders who constructed a genuine home from nothing in a matter of weeks, and fighters who stood between my people and annihilation, grieving their own losses even as they secured our survival. The galaxy's nightmare, other species had warned us, would begin the moment a human warship arrived in answer to our call. They were not entirely wrong, I have come to understand. Something did begin that day, something vast and complicated, and occasionally frightening in its capacity for both creation and destruction. But for my people, huddled in the dark of a dying ship, watching a single vessel fly directly into the heart of an enemy formation without hesitation, that nightmare the galaxy feared became, against every expectation we carried into that desperate moment, the beginning of something else entirely.
4. It became the beginning of home.